Well, welcome everyone. It's 2 o'clock on the nose Eastern, so I think we'll go ahead and start to get underway as folks sort of filter in from the waiting room. Maybe we should take another minute now that I see more folks are joining us to allow them into the waiting room before we commence. So I'll give about another 30 seconds and then we'll go ahead and get underway. All right, let's go ahead and begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the dialogue between quantitative and qualitative research, a summer program of the AALS section on the empirical study of legal education and the legal profession. I am CJ Ryan. I'm the section's chair, and before we begin our program, I wanted to thank you for being here with us and to preview a little bit about how we'll spend the next hour or so. So for the first 40 minutes of our time together, we're going to hear from our presenters, which we're going to follow with a 20-minute Q&A segment. So we ask that you hold your more in-depth questions until that time. However, we're monitoring the chat function, so if you have a question, feel free to place it in the chat. That will help us to keep the queue now and when it's time for Q&A. And it's our endeavor to make this entire session, but especially the Q&A portion, interactive. So please don't hesitate to use the chat. But now for why we're all here. Joining us are two distinguished scholars, Mira Deo and Bob Nelson, who have made indelible marks on our field with their work. And our conversation today will consider their perspectives on research methods in their own work. So please allow me to introduce them. Mira Deo is the Honorable Vaino Spencer Chair and Professor of Law at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles, California. She is also director of the Law School Survey of Student Engagement, or LESI, which houses the largest repository of law student data and is based at Indiana University Bloomington. Go Hoosiers. She is a national expert on legal education, racial representation, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She teaches civil procedure, evidence, law and society, and race in the law. Deo's research utilizes empirical methods to interrogate institutional diversity, affirmative action, and critical race theory. Professor Deo's scholarship has been widely published in law reviews and peer-reviewed journals and cited numerous amicus briefs filed before the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2020, Mira Deo was elected to the American Law Institute, and her book, Unequal Profession, Race and Gender in Legal Academia 2019, an instant classic in my opinion, draws from her innovative Diversity in Legal Academia project, the first national empirical study of law faculty utilizing an intersectional framework. So welcome, Mira. Bob Nelson is the Director Emeritus and the McCrate Research Chair in the legal profession at the American Bar Foundation, as well as Professor of Sociology and Law at Northwestern University. Professor Nelson is a leading scholar in the fields of the legal profession and discrimination law. At the ABF, he has founded multiple projects centered on these research interests: After the JD, Future of Latinos in the United States, World Justice Project, and Changing Dynamics of Employment Discrimination. He has written multiple articles for publication and has authored or edited 10 books, including Diversity in Practice, Race, Gender, and Class in Legal and Professional Careers, 2016, and Rights on Trial, How Workplace Discrimination Law Perpetuates Inequality, 2017. And most recently, The Making of Lawyers' Careers, Inequality and Opportunity in the American Legal Profession, forthcoming this year, 2023, which I hope we can hear a preview of in a moment, Bob. So welcome, Bob and Mira, and I will turn it over to Mira at this time. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to start by sharing. All right, hopefully everyone can see this now. Got 2 thumbs up, got 5 thumbs up. Okay, perfect. So thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to share the stage, particularly with Bob Nelson. And honestly, just for putting together an event like this. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Bob. And also, we have plenty of time for Q&A, so I'm excited to have a conversation as well that follows. So I am really thrilled to talk about what I'm calling the beauty of mixed method research. I'm going to focus, I've been asked to focus on qualitative research. I'm also sharing some innovative methods that I don't usually get to talk about. Most people in presentations I give are focused on the findings. Of course, those are exciting, but it's really a treat to talk about the methods today. So here's a brief outline of what I'm hoping to cover in my 20 minutes or so of presentation time before we open it up for that discussion. So we're going to start with some sort of basics, the way that I think about mixed methods, why I love it, why I use it. Maybe some of that will resonate with you as well. And then we'll move on to look at some actual research projects. We'll talk a little bit about the Diversity in Legal Academia project, which CJ highlighted in my introduction. I'll also turn to talk a little bit about LESI, which is more almost purely quantitative in nature. And then we'll end with my pandemic effects on legal academia project, which actually shares a lot of similar features in terms of methods with the first one. All right, so I think of quantitative research as helping us understand what is going on. So with surveys, for instance, we can learn a lot about what people do, sometimes even how they do it. We usually have a question or a series of questions already in mind, and we already have some ideas about possible responses that we can include so that we can give people options for how to respond. And often people can check as many boxes as they want. So what that means for us as researchers is that it is generally pretty easy to interpret, or at least to analyze that data. And it creates really helpful data for us to understand what is happening. Then we also have qualitative research, which I think of as helpful in understanding the why. So when we talk about interviews, focus groups, even participant research, participant observation research studies, there's a lot of nuance involved. Our research subjects choose their own words. They're not limited by what we say or how we might say it, or even what we expect. Often we can be surprised by things that our participants share with us, or they can even encourage us to think about things in a new way. It can be very complicated to code and analyze. We don't have a closed universe of options. Again, they're using their own words. All options are open. Participants can say whatever they want. And so, of course, that can be complicated for us in terms of just identifying patterns, grouping particular themes, ideas, words together. Also in focus groups and in participant observation, they're not only talking to us, the researcher, but often they're talking to others, to one another as well. So this I think of as a wonderful way to hear from their own perspective why people do the things they do. So there is some obvious overlap. Sometimes surveys can get at the why, and of course, interviews can ask about what, but there's considerable area for expansion. And this is why I like to use both. So the two together overlap, as you can see here, but they give us an opportunity to combine the what with the why with maximum efficiency. So I'm going to share some examples of how I like to do that, or how it works out well in the type of research that I do. So we can move on to see some of these mixed methods in action. Here's the first example. The Diversity in Legal Academia project collected survey and interview data from law faculty around the country, including 63 women of color, which is the core sample of the project, and comparative samples of men of color, white women, and white men. I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to talk about some innovative methods too, even beyond the basics of surveys and interviews. So we're going to start with that now. So what was innovative about this project? If we back up a moment, many people are familiar with snowball sampling introduced by statistician Leo Goodman. You start with a seed group of participants who nominate others. Those people participate and nominate others, and that's how your sample grows. Snowball sampling has been used widely throughout the social sciences. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it, perhaps have used it in your own research. It has been critiqued, though, for the potential for bias, particularly if you start with a seed group that could create ungeneralizable results. So for instance, a snowball sample that began with a seed group of participants from the Midwest would likely be challenging to generalize to the entire United States population because the social networks of those in the Midwest are comprised not exclusively, but largely of other Midwesterners. So to combat this potential for bias, researchers developed a variant called target sampling. So with target sampling, the researcher methodically chooses seed participants to reflect broad representation, and then instead of accepting every nominated participant, selects among those who are nominated to ensure that that broad representation is maintained throughout data collection. So if the researcher plans to generalize to the entire United States, then all regions are included in the seed group, but also they are painstakingly tracked throughout data collection so that the researcher can correct for any potential bias. So how do I do this? For the DLA study, I tracked race and gender. As I mentioned, women of color are the core part of the project itself, but also I tracked region of the country, selectivity of the law school where they worked, faculty tenure status to include tenured as well as pre-tenure faculty, formal leadership status to include deans, vice chancellors, et cetera, and more. This way, if I had 2 Black women from the East Coast already participating in my study, I could select among those who were nominated Black women from the West Coast or from the South. I could ensure that enough leaders were included, that I had Latinas from top tier schools as well as more access-oriented schools. And this was the perfect methodology for my study, particularly because there is no direct listing of all faculty of color in the US. So using target sampling, I could operationalize my data to get answers to these various research questions, both the what as well as the why. So how did I do that? I utilized a mixed methods approach. First, I collected survey data from all participants online. I could have asked them these questions in an interview, but it would have taken so much more time. And I had some idea of response options, or they could be easily noted from the participant herself. Plus, since I was following up with interviews, I could ask them to elaborate on any of the responses they had already provided on the survey. All right, so what are some easy or useful survey questions to ask in this type of study? I asked, what year did you complete your law degree? Certainly, I could have asked them that in our conversation. It actually did come up frequently in interviews, but I had it quantified and written down as part of the survey. I asked, how much time per month do you spend mentoring law students? What was your total estimated debt from law school? The survey had 30 questions, most of them quantifiable, and some with a comment box or very clear response options. One of the last questions on the survey asked participants to nominate up to 5 others. Because of my target sampling approach, I then considered each person nominated to see if they fit the needs of the study. Did I already have too many tier 1 schools? Then I would take folks from lower ranked schools. Maybe I didn't have enough junior faculty. I could fix that or consider that in deciding who to select from among those who were nominated. Interviews, though, are the heart of this study. I asked about everything from faculty pathways to the profession, interaction with colleagues, as well as students, interest and experiences in leadership, sources of support, work-life balance, and more. And I'll just briefly mention that I use Stata and Excel for quantitative analyses, mostly cross-tabs, to frame the qualitative data. And then I used Atlas TI to code and analyze the interviews. The coding scheme actually first relied on the interview questions themselves to search for patterns, but then ongoing data collection and analyses revealed some additional avenues that required some deeper analysis as well. All right, so then what do I do with the data? This is just one example that I can share about student evaluations. In particular, it's one that focuses on the ways in which students tend to notice, good or bad, often negatively, the style of their women of color professors, to the exclusion often even of their teaching effectiveness or pedagogical approach. So you can see from the data that's shared here on the slide, each of these are actual quotes from participants in the DLA study. And you can see that the voices of the participants really comes through. I can then frame this qualitative data with survey findings, providing numbers or explanations for how the majority of women of color who had tenure or promotion challenges, complications, or issues did so because of teaching evaluations. But here with this slide, you get a little bit more a picture of why. All right, that's study number one. What if we think about what is really a purely quantitative project? I think many of you are familiar with the Law School Survey of Student Engagement, or LESE. LESE conducts an annual survey in partnership with participating law schools. We ask about everything from time usage to the quality and frequency of interactions with faculty, staff, and fellow classmates. And then we publish blog posts, formal reports. We work with individual schools to improve the student experience. Our methods are relatively straightforward. We collect and report on national aggregate survey data using quantitative methods. Fancy regression models generally don't work once we try to disaggregate. So we generally stick with basic correlations and crosstabs, at least for our annual reports. And so here's a little bit about how the survey works generally. Learning outcomes can be difficult to measure. Schools often rely on inputs like course offerings as proxies for student learning. So the opportunity to learn was used as evidence that actual learning was happening. The ABA standards, however, now require schools to rely on outcomes to demonstrate that their curricula are having those desired effects on students. And they have to be measured using formative and summative assessments. Interpretation 3.15.1 identifies student evaluation of the sufficiency of their education as one method for how to do this. And so LESE's focus on the student experience provides really valuable insights on how the process of legal education affects student development. So it's particularly useful when we measure the kind of activities that are empirically associated with student learning and with institutional effectiveness. So in order to help schools assess engagement, LESE asks students about a variety of issues relevant to learning: how hard they work in law school, how much time they spent on various class-related, co-curricular, extracurricular, even non-curricular activities, their relationships with faculty, staff, and other students, the extent to which their schools contribute to their knowledge, skills, and personal development in a variety of different areas, the kind of learning that's emphasized in class. It might be analysis or making judgments or even memorization. The survey also asks students to evaluate the level of support that they receive from their school. And this includes support from particular administrative offices, as well as the overall environment, both for academics and personal support. Since its first national administration in 2004, more than 200 law schools have participated in the LESE survey. And we do engage in full population sampling. We have usually roughly a 50% or higher response rate. All right, so what do we do with this data? We take it and we share almost exclusively quantitative findings. And so today I'm going to focus some on belonging, just to give you a sense of how this data differs from what I shared earlier from the Diversity in Legal Academia project. First, just a quick definition of belonging and why it's important. So students who feel like they are part of a campus community are more likely to succeed academically and professionally. So here's some findings based on race. Essentially, as you can see from the chart, white students overall are more likely than students of color to feel like they are part of their law school community. We can also disaggregate this data further. So here we have a slide that looks specifically at race times gender, so the combination of identity characteristics, both race and gender. And this reveals that women in every racial or ethnic group have a lower sense of belonging than their same race male classmates. So it's not just a gender effect in and of itself, but it's actually carrying through, even if we look more carefully at race and gender combined. Sometimes even with LESE data, we can dig deeper. This is what I used as the foreword to our annual report, The COVID Crisis in Legal Education. It's the actual words of some of our law student participants, what many of them shared in the comments section of our 2021 survey. And they speak for themselves. Generally, we have an esteemed member of the legal academy or the legal profession write a foreword for us. But in this instance, I thought, really, nobody could say it better. So even though LESI tends to be purely quantitative, here's an example of how we could still kind of mix these methods to give students a voice in this research. All right, last study, pandemic effects on legal academia, or the PILA project. I followed a similar approach for PILA as I did for the DLA study, speaking with 35 law professors during the first year of COVID, academic year 2020 to 2021. Every participant completed an online survey through Qualtrics and then joined me for a one-on-one in-depth interview over Zoom. Thinking back to that time when the interviews first began, nobody was vaccinated. I talked with people when we didn't yet know how the virus spread. There were no therapies available. Women were leaving the workforce in droves. Schools and camps were completely shut down. Ultimately, vaccines became available to those who could find appointments online. Hate crimes were on the rise, particularly against Asian Americans. There was police brutality and vigilante injustice, resulting in the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer. It was a particularly challenging year, not only because of the pandemic. And so in large part, the PILA study documents the challenges for particularly vulnerable populations of faculty, including caregivers, women of color, and untenured faculty, including both pre-tenure professors and contract-based. So what sorts of findings do we have, and how can we merge survey data with interview data? So here I'm going to share a slide on strategies and solutions. A lot of the research that I share, it documents ongoing challenges, but I always like to end on a little bit of a positive note, right? Something good to think about or to strategize for. And so here I'm focusing on caregivers who have been struggling through the pandemic and are still reeling from its lingering effects. And so we can think again about how to frame the qualitative data with the survey data. And my study shows clearly that most professors need more support. PILA survey data instead show that over 1/4 of faculty have taken up to a 15% salary reduction since the start of COVID. Over 1/3 of professors are working with decreased or eliminated research funds or stipends, no sabbaticals, RAs, TAs, or pay for overload teaching. In fact, my survey data indicate that only 40% of law professors felt supported by their institutions in the first year of COVID. So that tells us what is going on. Now we can dig a little deeper to understand the why. So the most common accommodation has been tenure delay. Some professors don't want to forego a pay raise. They know a 1-year delay might not help them since we're in our 3rd+ year of COVID effects, especially since caregivers will be compared to men, some of whom have been writing nonstop, or even non-caregivers, whether they're men or women. Tenure delay doesn't even apply to contract-based faculty, of course, either. So instead, schools might consider an automatic extension for contract-based faculty, or even just count what professors have already produced pre-pandemic and prorate expectations. Clinical faculty, some got an automatic teaching reduction. So Jay, a clinical professor, says that everybody in his group took a 2-student reduction. He should have 8 students, but now he only has 6. We could do this with service assignments as well that take account of personal challenges, but most schools like SAMS really did not apply a holistic, individualized approach. Lots of faculty members said the administration had never reached out to them at all about their needs. Instead, kind of just barely prepping the basics. And no, many told me, remember from those early days, there was not enough hand sanitizer. A lot of people told me directly they were tired of lip service and anxious about how policies might translate into action, or how talk might translate into an actual policy even. So Dana said they talk about like, oh, it's okay if you're not doing as much committee work or scholarship, but that's not reflected at all in the actual policies at her school. So what's the best course of action? Irene actually explains this really well. She says, I think that the administration has to listen. They just have to listen. It's not good enough that you send a questionnaire and then you take the results and put it in the trash or in a file or show some accreditor that you did something. They are not listening. So you can see here that the survey data can help us understand what's going on, and then we can dig a little deeper, hear from people in their own words, and really better understand the why. using the qualitative data. So for me, this is why I love mixed method data. To me, this really is the beauty of mixed method research. So I'll stop there. I think I'm right at time. And so I hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit about some innovative methods and also about mixed method research. And I look forward to talking with you all more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mira. Bob, you ready?
I am ready. I'm going to share my screen. My mouse cooperates. So thanks, CJ and Amy and Trent and Rachel and all for putting together this session. It's great to be paired with Mira Dow, who I'm a big fan of. And I think we do have very complementary sort of approaches. So, my presentation, I'm first going to give a very brief overview of the uses of quantitative data, what kind of data we might use. And then I'll use after the JD book, The Making of Lawyers' Careers, as an example of how we can do quantitative research. So, my basic message to my students and everyone is that method needs to be informed by theory. And we have to put forth, first of all, what is our research question? What are we interested in? Theoretically informed opportunism can be great if you happen upon a data set and see that it can contribute insights to questions you care about. That's totally fine. And also, we have a lot of people who are using data for policy work or for institutionally oriented purposes, and that's fine too. It just helps define what the research projects should be. And so there's lots of different kinds of quantitative data, I think, for this group. I know we have kind of a range of audience, and this is probably very, very basic for you all. But this is just a short list of different kinds of quantitative data that we may not always think about as being subject to analysis by quantitative methods. But surveys, which I'm mostly talking about today, but there can be official records like case filings or judicial opinions. Published records like using law firm websites. You can scrape a law firm website to look at the gender and racial composition or the law school graduating composition of law firms. Experimental and quasi-experimental designs, for example, with vignette studies, etc. Video and audio recordings, for example, of jury deliberations or media reports, or now podcasts, which are prevalent. Participant observation in a more systematic way, for example, through court watching programs in which you not only watch, but you actually code what is taking place behaviorally. And then there's a style of research known as meta-analyses, which looks at published scholarship and tries to synthesize in a critical way what the sort of the weight and the quality of articles show on a particular kind of question. For example, Sandifer's work on the effect of legal representation. So the goal of quantitative analysis, very often it is descriptive. This is a little bit what how Mira was characterizing it, but also it's very important that we test theory. And that the way we do that does vary a lot by discipline. So different disciplines have different theoretical issues, but also are comfortable with and advocate different kinds of analyses. I think one thing to note is that there has been a notable rise in causal analysis in economics and political science and sociology, in which there's a particular focus on trying to construct your analyses in a way that you can make strong sort of causal statements. So the project that I'm going to talk about is a big collaborative project. It's leading to a book, The Making of Lawyers' Careers, Inequality and Opportunity in the American Legal Profession. It's coming out in the fall from the University of Chicago Press. Here's the cover of this long-awaited book. And I like to start my presentations. I'm just going to note this. I like to start presentations with a story or a set of narratives that hook the audience. And so we start the book with 5 narratives of 5 different lawyers and looking at their career trajectories. And in my presentations, I often talk about Alicia and Constance, quote them, talk about the different trajectories of their careers, and then locate their stories within a broader structure or quantitative analysis. So here's our bandits, our team of people working on the After the JD project. And the research methodology is quite elaborate. We've been working on this for over 20 years. We took a nationally representative sample of lawyers who passed the bar in the year 2000. We actually should call this the After Passing the Bar project, but we call it After the JD, and the name is stuck. And so there's been 3 waves of data collection, of survey data collection, 3 years into careers, 7 years into careers, and 12 years into careers. And then in addition to that, we did use web sources to find out where lawyers were in 2019. So we actually had them up through 20 years of their careers. There is a minority oversample in the sampling process. And so we've interviewed a lot of lawyers. And in addition to the surveys, which have quite high response rates, we have 219 in-depth interviews that we use to construct 4 narrative chapters as part of the book. So I just want to highlight a few aspects of this. This is it's kind of a big theoretically motivated book, but with like big themes. And so this goes back to sort of the source of a lot of our thinking about lawyers and the legal profession. Heinz and Laumann's sort of famous concept of the 2 hemispheres, and the split screen show is here, the storefront law office, and then the glass and steel high-rise office of corporate and business law. And in a way, what we're struggling with, the question is the 2 hemispheres concept still useful? In what ways? And is there a link between, something like the hierarchies that were observed in Chicago in 1975 and what we see today in the legal profession? So this first screen, I'm just going to show a few quantitative slides to give you a flavor for this, and maybe some of the unique advantages of doing comprehensive, quantitative work. So these are 2 pie charts from wave 3 of the project. And the pie chart on, my left is respondents and what percentage of the respondents are working in different practice settings. And then on the right, it's the earnings, the share of total earnings of lawyers in different practice settings. And so if you don't have a comprehensive national sample, you can't accomplish this kind of overview or analysis. And so what this shows is that business and large law firms have a substantial portion of lawyers, but they really dominate in terms of earnings. So between business and law firms over 100 lawyers, they have almost half of all earnings of lawyers, and much smaller shares for the nonprofit and government sector. And then this is another sort of big structural dimension that we're able to analyze. It's what percentage of lawyers' total effort are spent on different kinds of clients. And so, with the survey data we have and the sort of detailed time allocation data that we have, we can add that up. And so, this shows that 41% of all total effort goes to large and mid-sized businesses. And then when you compare, the next largest group actually is middle and low-income individuals. We break that out to show what percentage of that is pro bono effort. And you can see the pro bono makes up only 1% of total lawyer effort. So it's a drop, in a way, a drop in the bucket in terms of the overall activities of lawyers. I'm going to skip over some of these slides very quickly. I do want to note this one. This is basically the question of who makes equity partner when we look at the 2019 data, mostly from LinkedIn, from some other web sources as well. And what it shows is that white men continue to dominate in terms of making equity partner. They make up about 70% of the sample, but 80% of equity partners, and that's taken from data that's available on the web. We looked at earnings, but but I'm skipping over to the survey results on self-reported discrimination by gender and race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation at wave 3. And I'll just highlight, one of these cells, which is that African-American women are by far report the highest levels of discrimination in a way that's it's very similar to your figure, Mira, on the percentage of negative experiences or sense of belonging among law students. And then finally, we have we have a lot of data that shows that women are paid less than men, that there's racial discrimination, and yet when you look at the question about whether or not lawyers are satisfied with their careers, these groups are very happy, and as happy as most other, like white men or other dominant groups. And it's one of these sort of paradoxes that we observe in the data. This is it broken down by gender and by race, ethnicity. But then this also has it by law school, a law school tier, and by the wave of the survey. And you can see, just to point out a couple of things from these bar charts, the lawyers who graduated from top-ranked law schools started out being relatively unhappy in their careers, but then they've gotten more happy over the course of their careers. But I think what is most striking is that tier 4 graduates have consistently been the most satisfied with their careers compared to all other lawyers. And so, despite what we might think of as their some lower status in the profession, in terms of their career prospects and analysis, they're very, very happy. So I think hopefully that gives you a flavor of what quantitative data can do. You can put together insights that you're not able to do if otherwise. We may get glimmers of this through qualitative data, and certainly, some of the mechanisms we can see through the qualitative data more effectively. But I think, Mira and I are in strong agreement that it's great to be able to have both, and that I hope this has been somewhat interesting to you. Thanks.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob and Mira. We can go ahead and begin our Q&A segment now. Feel free to populate the chat with your questions. And as you're thinking of them, I have one for each of you, and I'll start with Mira since you started first. One of the compelling things about Unequal Profession and a lot of your work, Mira, is the voice you gave to your research subjects, and qualitative methodologies really allow you to capture that voice. But I'm wondering, thinking of the audience here and the fact that some of our members may not be as well versed in collecting qualitative data, what advice would you give to a researcher maybe just embarking on a qualitative research project or even a mixed method study in terms of capturing the voice of your research subjects?
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. And again, I'm so grateful to you and to Rachel and Amy and Trent for just conceptualizing this event. And I hope it is a conversation. So I'll answer this, and then maybe Bob, you have a response, and then others from the audience or some of the organizers, I'm sure you have ideas for how to do this as well. I get a similar question often. Often it's from people who have not done any empirical projects in the past. And, sometimes they want to take me to coffee and talk about how to operationalize their project. And, of course, that's not possible. And so I think for people who are thinking about expanding into maybe an unfamiliar methods arena, it's helpful to have someone work with you who can help you do that. So often I'll tell people to co-author with someone, and you do your job and they do their job, and then you can talk through how those things can work together. Especially if you're interested, or you think you might be interested in moving into that methods, using those methods in future research projects. I think it can be particularly valuable to have somebody on board so that you can learn a little bit as you go. I personally don't think there's anything magical about a PhD. It really is just an opportunity to delve very deeply into how to do the research. And so if you can work with someone who can share the theory with you, who can explain the methods, where you can learn how to do it in the way that maybe I worked with mentors and others when I was getting my PhD. If you can do that without getting a PhD, I think it can be just as valuable in terms of training. It is important, though, I think, to not, just put some questions together and think that's going to be a really useful, reliable study. I see this with survey data a lot as well, Bob, if you want to jump in there. But that's usually what I suggest, either to hire a consultant, and a consultant can be a graduate student. It doesn't have to be, a superstar like Bob. It can be a future superstar like Bob, who's early in their training, but knows how to put that project together. Or you can work collaboratively with someone you already know and respect and admire, who maybe has similar research questions to yours. And just as Bob explained, we want to make sure that our questions match the methods. And so if your question is one that you recognize is better suited to qualitative methods, you may not get the desired results from asking the questions in a survey. If you know that you might get a better, more useful set of responses from doing an interview or running a focus group, then you can either hire someone to do that or work collaboratively with someone who already knows how to do that, and ideally learn from them so that you can run your own projects if you want to in the future as well.
Thanks, Mira. That was a wonderful response. And I think it really highlights something that was running across the two presentations today, both Bob's and yours, the importance of coordinating theory and imputing that into the survey or the data collection or whatever sort of gleaning you're doing. It needs to be informed by theory ultimately, because that drives the method, that drives indeed the whole project. So I'm grateful for that. Bob, my question to you. So you have this beautiful project, and it speaks to something that Mira was just attesting to, the importance of collaborators, right? AJD is very much a joint effort, but you have been its curator for many years, and the longitudinal design of it is something to marvel at, truly. So my question is, what suggestions would you have for a researcher in designing a project of that scope or of that magnitude? Because you've been able to produce some really impactful and meaningful results and shape what we know about the legal profession. Did you know that sort of going into it when you were doing the first wave? And if so, how did you create the longevity to make this such a longitudinal study that it is today?
Well, that's a great question, CJ. I had a somewhat different role in the very beginnings of the project than I did in the later waves of the project. I was very influential in the research design, which was focused on markets as opposed to like law schools as the starting point. Law schools are a lot easier to start a sample with, but you can lose the sort of market, the tiered market aspect of it. But then, that we had a large project team. I was not super involved in, all the aspects of the questionnaire construction. But then when I became the director of the ABF, I recognized that, this is our signature project. It can be our signature project and a kind of unique contribution. And so, one answer to your question is you align yourself in a way to find the resources. And the ABF is really special in that respect, that we have sort of institutional continuity. We can raise money. We raised a lot of money. We had NSF funding for each wave, but also Law School Admissions Council, Access Lex, other big funders now early on. And then, but I think our project team developed a chemistry and a set of commitments to the project. And so we had to make some strategic choices. Wave 3, we decided not to try and interview people who had never responded. The response rates for that group was much smaller. And so for cost effectiveness. We only interviewed people that we interviewed at least once or twice. But I think there was just a real commitment by the group that this is, enormously valuable and unique. And then we've had very positive responses to that. And I think it's true for a lot of sort of major, data collection enterprises, National Longitudinal Survey of Youth or other, big projects that track cohorts over time. They're expensive, but you have to make the case the science is needed to answer the questions. But we've, in a way, we've been very privileged, to have this, access to this. I think if you don't have those resources, you still got to be ambitious in terms of your research designs and your thinking about it. Don't throw away your opportunities. Keep track of your respondents so you do have the opportunity to go back to them later on. I think Leslie is, Mira's other big shop is a wonderfully inventive, creative access point, for getting data and exploiting it, over time. And so I think you need to have, a sense of commitment to the importance of the work and the importance of the question. And you have to sort of adapt to what you find. One of the cool things about, even big quantitative data sets is the surprises you come up against, So the things about the satisfaction patterns and how it, or like, the stuff on race, the continuing racialization of law firms. There are things to this that you wouldn't necessarily expect at the outset, but then when you discover them, you go, aha, and it's important to really dig into them. So, yeah.
Many thanks to you both. I won't hog the Q&A. I do want to open it up to everyone else, but I just wanted to get the ball rolling. I have more questions though, in case there's a lull. I don't see any in the chat. Does anybody want to ring in, maybe turn their mute off and ask their question?
TJ, maybe people could just briefly introduce themselves and say maybe if they're working on an empirical project. And I see that Katie Young has to leave, but says thank you.
Terrific.
So one thing that I'll pose kind of to Mira and to me, it's a question we get all the time from grad students. How large a sample do I have to have? How many interviews do I have to have? And that's a sort of a topic that's often debated. And it's not like there's one single answer, although I have heard that Gender and Society will not even consider articles that have fewer than 30 interviews in their samples, even if it's like a very unusual sample, like sexually abused men or something, where it's very difficult to come up with those numbers. And so there's an interesting set of literatures around that.
Well, I know, Jeremy, you've been editing a journal, and do you have criteria like that?
We do not. One of the issues that I was actually about to ask about that comes up sometimes when we're editing articles that are based on interviews, where the author does not want to disclose who what quote goes with what interviewee. What kind of records do you keep so that in case something ever comes up later on and someone says, well, I didn't say that or whatever, how do you work out the relationship with the publication as to do the editors insist that they at least know who every quote is? Do you keep sort of a hidden spreadsheet behind a password link? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think the thorny issues around confidentiality and anonymity are really critical to discuss. And I don't find that we have an opportunity as researchers to talk about them much unless we're working collaboratively, like we were saying just a moment ago. That was part of the question that you brought up, CJ, too. It is a wonderful opportunity when you have a team to sort of talk through some of those challenges. I'll say openly that I have a lot of data that I don't use because I'm not comfortable sharing it because of the potential risk of revealing someone's identity. Things that, are really fabulous quotes that I think just in case, right? I can't use this because it's possible that somebody will know. In the preface to my book, I actually wrote something about how, as you read some of the data in the book, you might feel like you know who I'm talking about, because I was really nervous about that too. And what I decided to write, which is the truth, is that most likely someone that something similar happened to. The whole point of the book is to reveal the ways in which these are systemic and structural challenges. And so many of us feel like this happens to us alone. And part of the point of the book is to make clear how it's actually, even though it feels very personal, it's not actually just happening to one person. And so you may know someone who experienced something very similar, and probably they're not the one I interviewed to get that quote. The challenges are so pervasive that things that happen to a friend or a colleague have happened to many others. And so that's how I can document it. So it's kind of the broad idea of confidentiality and anonymity is something that, we have to be particularly careful about. There are also times in my published work where I won't identify, for example, the race of the person. I use pseudonyms for everyone. And so far I have used the same pseudonym in every published piece for a particular research participant. So if Trent participated in one of my research studies, I might call him Joe, but I won't change his name from Joe between different articles or in my book. He'll be Joe throughout. And I thought about changing that too, to be honest, because I thought, what if somebody reads this piece and they realize Joe is a father and this is how old his kid is, if I reveal that in a caregiving piece, and then they read some other piece about student evaluations and they learn that Joe teaches torts. I don't want to reveal too much about any one person, especially when we start talking about particularly small populations. And, we talked about this already, right? When you start dealing with populations that are very small, whether it's men who were sexually abused in the past, or whether we're talking about Native American women law faculty, there's not very many of them either. And so it is something that does give me pause, something that I worry about and that I'm very careful. And so I might, in those instances, say a woman of color professor, or not name her. Even though I have a pseudonym for her, I might not say what it is. Or I might just say a woman professor or a person of color, or a torts professor, right? Without signaling anything about race or gender. And so I've tried to avoid those concerns by being creative in how I identify people. Generally speaking, the publications, some of them have asked, especially, with student-run journals, some of them have asked to see the actual data, and I have to explain to them, the basics of IRB, things like that I can't actually share the full transcripts of anybody. And so I find there's a lot of education involved in this as well.
Thanks.
Anne, I know you have done a lot of interviewing and you've got a book coming out and you got access to some pretty high profile lawyers. I wondered if you wanted to say a word about that project and how you did that. You're on mute.
I just wanted to preface my remarks by saying I'm really kind of I have so much respect for Bob and Mira and the projects they've done here. So I'm really very happy to have them taking the lead and speaking with much greater expertise than I have on these questions. Yes, I've done a fair bit of empirical work over the years, and for most of my projects, I've collaborated with other social scientists who have more experience with the methods I find useful to employ. My current project is on the campaign to deregulate money in politics, and it's based on all kinds of data, but including interviews with 52 lawyers who've been involved in the campaign over time. So I've made confidentiality commitments to them. That is not identifying them by name in any of the quotes I use in the book. I share some of the concerns that Mira has expressed about the ways in which they might be identifiable. So I'm trying to be very careful in what I say, even though I don't think for the most part these are particularly sensitive issues. Most of these lawyers are quite happy to talk about their work and to be identified with the causes that are described in this work. I actually had a question, and I just wondered if either Bob or Mira or anyone else on this call has used other kinds of empirical methods not yet described here. I'm really interested in computational text analysis and topic modeling and that kind of thing. It seems beyond my ability to employ these techniques, but I see so much potential room for using those techniques to analyze big trends in law. And so my current book project is about the development of constitutional law over time. And it seems to me that large data sets and some of the sophisticated techniques coming out of primarily computational computer science and such has so much potential. It could be such a rich type of analysis. And I actually wonder if you've had are aware of developments in this area, or people who are particularly keen on pushing the boundaries of what's currently being done in law. I know there's lots in media studies, for example, but it seems less in law so far.
Yeah, so I'll just say there is a lot of potential there, and I think, but the same message. Some of my colleagues say, if it's big data with no question or theoretical edge, it's just big.
Yeah.
And that, that may not necessarily be all that useful, but I think it is really fascinating. It's almost like a generational effect here, like where the old generation social scientists are hiring a new generation of social scientists who are using computational methods. And so in sociology Northwestern, we just hired a young man from Harvard, Oscar Schuler, who is on the leading edge of this stuff, and he's very excited to work with the sociologists of law, me and Laura Beth and others in the department. The department has a big cultural component, to put his methods to work on the kind of theoretical, issues that we'd be fascinated by, and including, stuff like, your questions on the history of constitutions. So I think it's exciting.
I may follow up with you on this, Bob.
Sure. All right, great. Yeah.
I agree with what Bob said, and Anne, I think there's so many directions where we can take this, and I think especially as empirical methods have become more interesting to law faculty. I've only been teaching for 15 or 16 years, and I feel like when I started, I still had to tell people what it is that I did, and now I think people have at least a general understanding of what empirical methods are. And they're more interested in using them and interesting in different ways and with collaborators too. As co-authoring has become maybe not widespread, but more accepted in legal academia. I don't think it's where, other fields are, but I think that's becoming more understood and recognizing too the value of collaborative research. So hopefully we see those trends continuing together.
If there aren't other questions, I would love to just push that point a little further and maybe ask for a little more input on this. So it seems to me that some of these techniques are being developed in fields where there is no conception of how they might be useful to the social sciences, for example, and where the incentives are primarily to develop greater sophistication and to show a facility with the methods, and that you're pushing the methods further without a clear sense of how they might apply, for example, to in social science fields where the questions are important, have real purchase in the world. Is that fair, or do you think that that's just wrong, that the connections are being made between those who are developing the cutting edge methods and the social scientists who have a sense of the important questions where the methods might be useful?
Well, I think there has been a lot of growth. There's a lot more growth now within the social sciences and the social science disciplines. So they are much more sensitive to that, I think. But you're right, it's a huge world, right? And so like a lot of what Chatbot is doing is trying to figure out how to maximize, optimize your websites and the number of visits to your websites, through a mechanical process. It's sort of a very straightforward kind of marketing issue. So there's no theory as such there, but so it is a big world, and the social scientists are still in a way playing a small part, but it does need to grow and be developed. There's a fascinating project that's being done by a University of Nebraska law professor on mandamus orders, in which they have digitized an entire set of sort of mandamus requests and have begun to do, large scale analysis, a huge NSF funded project. And I'm blocking on her name, but if you go to the University of Nebraska Law School faculty, you'll see her name. And I think she's kind of a homegrown, analyst. She had this set of questions and then, hired a team of analysts, and it's very interesting. Very exciting.
I'll check it out.
I know we're a little past time, and some of our presenters actually may have other commitments this afternoon to wit a conference that they're attending that they need to get back to. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it. But so grateful to our presenters, Bob and Mira. So grateful to all who attended, and we will be recording this to post to our sections membership at the conclusion. I'll follow up with you, Trent, about that, doing just that. So thanks everyone so much. Have a great rest of the day and a wonderful summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.